Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this analysis is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. Looking back over our last 7 days, we can see a large corridor of the eastern half of the country has been exceptionally wet. We do have some parts of the Ohio River Valley getting into the lower and mid-Mississippi River Valley that have been seeing anywhere between 3 and in some locations over 8 inches of rain, and we certainly have a lot of flooding going on in this area right now. Even saw some severe weather just yesterday, a little microburst that went through parts of North Carolina here, causing some problems. Now in the bigger picture, just remember that this area that I'm kind of encompassing here right now has much above average soil moisture content. And the question I want to answer at the end of this video is, what does our spring forecast look like again? And let's just continue to build a narrative about spring by looking at the way things have been shaping up this winter. I think that's what I really want to focus on at the end of this video. So sit tight, we're going to get to it. I'm also going to talk about South America as well. So our all hazards weather map, just to cover some of the near-term weather we're dealing with here. Well, with this warm-up that we keep getting across, well, I'll just kind of do this and say it's in that area. Every day the temperatures rebound, we got a lot of moisture in the ground, and when the nighttime temperatures fall off, it's so saturated we get a lot of fog. Major river flooding, of course, and all of the tributaries that run in eventually to the Mississippi here. Today across Iowa, southern Minnesota, northern Illinois, and Wisconsin, we do have a freezing drizzle event we're going to watch. And then with the bitterly cold air, yes, minus 45-degree wind chills that's coming in here, we're going to watch right in through this area for the potential grabbing another couple of inches of snow today on some incredibly cold winds. Out west, we do have a system. You're going to see it come snaking in like this and eventually hit parts of the coastal ranges here in Northern California and the Sierra Nevada, maybe adding 1 to 3 feet of snow into the mountains here. And in the valley here, in the center part of the valley, maybe 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. And as you work your way up on elevation on either side of it, we may see upwards of 1 inch to 1.5 inches. So we have a very active pattern setting up, and I'm going to get right into some of our high resolution modeling of it. So let's get this going and pause it right here. This is the light freezing rain, freezing drizzle we're watching moving through in the early morning hours into midday from Iowa over into southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois. On the north side of that, as I rock back and forth mid-morning this morning, you see the snow building in. Now, to the south, as that system spreads east here, look at this. Right on that same area that we've had so much rain, we could get some spotty showers, maybe a thunderstorm in through here, and that's going to just add insult to injury on how wet things are in this area, even though it's not much rain anticipated at this point. The next main show comes in right here. Look out west. This is 10 o'clock tonight, getting into the early morning hours on Thursday. We're going to be watching a system spread rain and snow from initially Washington's coast through Oregon into Northern California. And what we notice here is that by the time we get out to Thursday afternoon and evening, that rain will spread through parts of the Sacramento Valley. It'll go right through San Francisco area, and you can see in through here where the boundary will be. We think it's about 2,000 to 2,500 feet where we switch over to snow. So some locally heavier rainfall amounts here, and as this main frontal band hits the coast, it will be adding quite a bit of rain to California. But what a lot of folks want to see this do is get all the way down into Southern California, into the San Joaquin Valley, hitting the mountains down here, putting some snow on them, which will be critical for the reservoirs. But this system kind of loses some of its punch as it gets further to the south. What's happening east of there? Well, look at the freezing rain we're expecting to extend, the potential for it, from parts of Texas and Oklahoma, eventually into Kansas, and then spreading into Missouri and Iowa and parts of Nebraska as well. Now this next system is going to be a bit of a mess as it pushes to the north. One of the main reasons why, well, I'm just take you back right here. You see this high pressure cell? I got it outlined here with this isobar. That brings in some cold air behind this first system that left. And the cold shallow air that's sitting here is going to be overrun by a lot of warm, moist air coming out of the Gulf. When that happens, the precipitation falls out of the warmer air aloft into the cold air near the surface, and it goes through a transition. And if it stays liquid but it super cools, we get freezing rain, or it could switch over to sleet, which freezes before it falls, or some snow. So that's what we're going to be watching here as this system goes through. So the probability of getting at least 1/10 of an inch of freezing rain through this Saturday morning is represented in this map. So as the system lifts out in this direction, we're going to watch for that transition right in the areas that you see the greatest coloring here. So if you're in those areas, keep an eye out for the potential for some light freezing rain. Now, this next system is working with a lot of moisture. We will see here that its potential to grab anywhere between 150 to well over 300% of normal precipitable water as it draws that moisture to the north here and curls up toward the Great Lakes. This system is lifting, and that's what's going to make the forecast for precipitation quite challenging. So if we look at it overall, keep your eye on these colors. That's about an inch, all right? We can see that this one is going to have the ability to spread quite a bit of heavy precipitation into this area. And again, that's an area that recently has seen a lot. To the south and east of there, we will watch out for some more thunderstorms out of this, but also maybe be able to grab in some locations, again, another inch of rainfall. Meanwhile, out west, you can see the precipitation amounts we're talking about here, and a lot of folks out west are wanting to see what this is doing in terms of snow. So why don't we talk about snow here? We can see that out west, the ability to grab another 1 to 3 feet here in the northern range of California, and then also getting to Sierra Nevada is a real thing. This is probably the area that's going to get the hardest. This would be Northern California, Southern Oregon. The higher elevations easily grabbing another 36 to 48 inches. But packing in that snow to the Sierra Nevada up into the Cascade Range is critical this time of year, given some of the deficits I've been talking about in this area. Coming back over to the Midwest, I think we're going to watch I-80 very carefully. It seems that as though north of that line is our best chance at getting some snow. Please do not look at this map and start assuming amounts. And the reason why is because this system, again, is one that's lifting, and therefore the transition over from freezing rain, sleet to snow is going to be a tricky one. And our snow ratio on this map is 10 to 1, but it may not be representative of what we get. I think the snow ratio will change the farther back west you go. But certainly this is targeting parts of the eastern Dakotas, but really Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan with the heaviest snowfall amounts, okay? So we're going to watch at the end of the week to see how much snow we can actually get there. I'll show you that update tomorrow. Right now, NOAA is predicting a really high probability of at least grabbing 4 inches in this area through Saturday morning. And the heavier snow threat will spread toward the east with time, okay? So that's a quick recap of that system. Let me show it to you in the operational European model. I'm going to go straight to it. We're going to skip the stuff at the beginning here because we've covered it and get right here. This is now Friday morning. So the next system is emerging. The cold air is already in place. I'm going to tell you one thing about this next system. It is going to be extremely windy. We saw those wind chill temperatures going down into like the negative 45 degree territory. Look at the winds on this up here. Very, very windy conditions. Again, watch your pinks. That's where the freezing rain is going to be. So this is Friday morning into afternoon, into evening. So the freezing rain spread from Kansas and Oklahoma, eventually over into parts of Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and now by Friday evening, getting into Saturday overnight and Saturday morning, it spreads through northern Illinois. But you notice that the system lifts, so it's going to transition over toward rain in those areas, while the snow line, like I said, it's definitely going to stay north of I-80 here, maybe up here toward like 90-94. So we're talking about snow in this area, and this system is on the move Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. One thing is for certain, it is going to be very windy around this, because immediately following it, as the system moves off to the north and east, big high pressure cell. Now, the northeast forecast is going to be very tricky as to where the rain-snow boundary is going to be. And I'm going to have to wait till the end of the week before I can give you any details on it. But we need to be watching out for the interior parts of the northeast for some bigger snow. Now, I'm going to let this play quickly after this. Watch. This is Sunday morning, afternoon, evening. Monday morning, afternoon, evening. Tuesday morning, afternoon, and evening. And if you're in the midsection of the country, what we're dealing with here is some colder weather, finally, and much drier conditions. And it will be windy at times. The West Coast, we tend to stay under the gun a little bit here in the near term. But the bigger questions I have to be asking myself is, does this temporary changeover from what was very warm conditions to now over toward more winter-like weather, what does that mean for our precipitation patterns coming out of the Pacific? Okay, so let's get there. Now, day 4 through 10, we see that the models are favoring, the GFS is favoring this corridor, and so is the European, with drier conditions here. Hooray for those folks, because it's been extremely wet. You can also see it's targeting more of Oregon and Washington than California on the precip. So this is looking at, again, January 18th through 25th, differences to normal. I want to show you what's going on in the jet stream to give us that pattern. But before I do that, we need to at least know what's controlling the jet stream. So take a look at this. Real quick review. In the eastern half of North America, phase 4, 5, and 6 represent the warm phases of the Mad-Julian Oscillation. 7, 8, 1, and 2 represent the colder phases, all right? What do we see going on here? The MJO is right now here in phase 5. It's going to go to phase 6. And then it is forecast, and we've seen this pretty consistently, to come into phase 7 and possibly come back into null phase. What I want to watch out for is any potential for this to come out into phase 8, 1, and 2. If it does, the cold air that's coming in the near term has longer legs. It's going to last a little bit longer. If it comes back into null phase and then emerges back over into phase 4, 5, and 6, we could see a repeat of the pattern we've seen so far in January as we start February. Now, at the same time this is going on, in the tropics, I'm watching very carefully two things. I'm going to circle them here in white. First is this. Second is this. Those reds represent a westerly wind burst, so the wind's coming out of the west. The blues represent strong trade winds, and they meet right here in the middle. And as a consequence, that is increasing the precipitation in this corridor. That is sitting right over the international date line. Now, because the air is rising there, we're putting a lot of heat in the upper levels of the atmosphere right in through here. And that's going to tend to crank up the subtropical jet stream at time. We're going to watch the interplay of the subtropical jet stream, which is here, and what's going on over here coming off of Japan. Certainly to the south of that, in Indonesia and the Philippines, it is very, very dry. But I'm going to talk about this in Australia and what's going on over here in parts of South America in just a few moments. Our jet stream pattern, notice again, strong winds here. Whenever we get strong winds coming off of Japan this time of year, we tend to find that they want to split into a subtropical branch, which I'm drawing right now, and a polar branch, which does something like this. For the West Coast, I'm going to be honest with you, right now I don't trust any forecast beyond about 7 or 8 days. And that's because where this split takes place, is it here? Is it farther back here, or is it here? That is still all up in the air in our weather forecast models. So we're going to watch this very, very carefully for the West Coast. Because aiding in this is the warm water that you see right in through here. Now I want you to remember the warm water you see there and the fact that it extends here all the way over into the Atlantic. Because when I'm talking to you about spring, that's going to be a critical piece. But right now that warm water is not associated with El Nino or La Nina. Right now, across the El Nino-La Nina region, which is in through here, we've got some cooler water stretching in this area and warmer in through here. This has been entirely driven by outside events, not El Nino and La Nina. And I think that's going to be the mainstay for the rest of our winter. So with that set up, let me show you what's going on. Remember, to get an El Nino, we've got to be consistently below -8 in our Southern Oscillation Index. We dipped there momentarily, but we've always been rebounding back up toward neutral conditions. Also, to get La Nina, you got to be up here in positive territory, which isn't even shown on this graph. So this part of the tropics is not dominating things. It's the MJO, it seems right now, that's really doing most of this. Certainly, we're not getting any help from the polar vortex. Right now, the polar vortex, which is shown to you over here in the map on the left, is incredibly strong. Now remember, the stronger the polar vortex, the tighter its grip on that cold air sitting in this region. A year ago, look at the map over there on the right. The polar vortex had split into two separate pieces, one over parts of Europe and Russia, the other part over parts of the Hudson Bay. And remember what happened. This was the massive cold air outbreak that came in right like this just before Super Bowl Sunday a year ago. And you all remember that. We saw wind chill temperatures -50 to -80 in parts of the Midwest and the Central Plains. Right now, our polar vortex is strong. And just so you can see how strong it is, take a look at this. Its current position is here. A year ago, right now, it was down there. And this is stronger winds going up on the x-axis. So what's going on here is that the cold we're going to be talking about coming out of the Canadian prairies, while it will last for 5 or 6 days, I don't think until we can connect it with a polar vortex disruption could we possibly get it to become what I would call brutally cold across the eastern half of the country and sustained cold. That's kind of a narrative that we've had for a while. You see the Arctic Oscillation, which represents kind of what's going on in that area, is positive or going back neutral. If we were going to see bitterly cold air unleashed across not only the Canadian prairies and the North Central Plains where it is now, but over a much bigger area, we'd need to see this thing coming down like this. In addition to that, is the Pacific advertising brutal cold? Not quite. You see the Pacific North American pattern is negative right now and is forecast to go back toward, we'll just call this near average. So when it's been negative, look at the graphic that's down there in the bottom left. The ridge has been tucked away out here. The flow's gone over the top, and that's why we've been getting our systems coming in from the northwest recently here in the Pacific Northwest. What we're seeing is maybe that ridge moving at times a little closer to the west coast, and if it does that, it's going to basically redirect things like this, which means we're going to be able to pull that colder air out of the Canadian prairies and north central U.S. temporarily, sending it all the way to the east coast. So the Pacific North American pattern's helping out with that, but it's not doing this, going way up here into its major positive phase, which will give you the full-blown view of that graphic there on the right. Hot and dry out west and cold and snowy in the Midwest. We're not seeing that setting up just yet. So our upper level pattern is doing just this. Ready? GFS left, European right. These are the ensembles. Let's pause it right here. This is the system that comes out this weekend. Look at this. This is Friday night around midnight or Saturday morning midnight. Look at the tilt on the trough in the GFS. It's the same thing in the European. Big time warmth out ahead of it, big moisture transport, but this trough, watch it, it's right here. It is going to lift straight to the Great Lakes. And systems that lift instead of dig don't bring in sustained cold behind them. It's going to get cold behind this, but not stick around forever. Now, one thing that I've missed, I think, in the forecast was that high pressure cell I talked about on Monday sitting over Alaska. I thought that it would dive in here, this ridge, see it? And then push this trough farther to the west. Well, the European model has given a little bit different solution. You see, here's the positive P&A pattern, trough, ridge. See it there? Coming back over into a trough. But that trough that's there in the Gulf of Alaska wants to actually, in the European model, migrate right over to parts of British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. While that's going on, this is going to target this region wetter. The GFS isn't buying it. It's trying to keep that trough. I know it's a subtle difference, but it wants to keep it further to the west. Hence, drier conditions here you'll see in a few moments. But then we get into week 2, I think we could get wetter here in coastal Oregon and Washington. Ridging here, drier here, and the air flows down to the southeast, and this is the cold 5 to 10 day time period. But does it last? As I play this forward, I do see this. The European model wants to keep a deeper trough in the central plains, whereas the GFS spreads it out over the south. You'll see what that means in terms of precipitation in a few moments. What I don't see is, even though we're going to go over to a cooler pattern at times, it's going to feel much more like winter. I don't see this pattern connecting with brutally cold air to bring in a sustained long time period of very, very cold air. I think winter is going to return, yes, but I don't think that this is going to be a switch over to like the polar opposite of what we just saw for the last 20 days across, especially across the eastern half of the country. So let's see what this means in terms of precip. Like I said, the European wetter, GFS drier for the northwest. The European wants to bring a trough in here that lifts through this area, hence wetter in the central plains and parts of the Midwest. Remember how much more flatter and elongated the GFS was? It's going dry or wetter, from Texas all the way over to the Carolina coast. I'm favoring the European model at this point. I think it has a better handle on the Pacific jet stream play as well as the Mad Julian Oscillation. So if you had to pick a map with me, I'd just say take a look at the one over there on the right. Temperatures. We know that the main cold axis is here, but over the next 5 days with the lifting trough in this area, that's going to keep this region warm. After that, the main cold axis sets up shop here and sends that cold air to the southeast as the positive P&A pattern takes over temporarily. Looking longer term, much of the country is going to go back over to what I would just call very normal winter conditions, with the exception of this corridor here still hanging on to its bitterly cold weather. If there's been any trend in the models, it's been here. I think it's responding to some tropical forcing and the increase in the global winds, suggesting that the eastern half of North America may favor a slight warm bias. Remember, a 1 or 2 degree warm bias in winter is still winter. It's still cold. This is not the blowtorch warmth we saw leading up to this point in time. Okay? So that's kind of a review of what we're dealing with here in the near term. Quickly into South America. With the MJO stuck in phase 4 and 5 and 6 right now, or not stuck, but moving through, we're dry in this area. What is critical about this pattern is it appears that once we get into week 2, we've seen consistent model agreement that we're going to go over wet in this corridor. Now, wet here into week 2, pushing us out toward the end of January, is not good for South America. They're trying to harvest a first crop of beans. Meanwhile, parts of Argentina and southern Brazil are forecast to go over drier under some higher pressure. So this will need to be watched carefully to see if it slows down the soybean harvest, because it also slows down the planting of the safrinha, cotton, and corn. Keep an eye on that. To finish this up, Australia. We would normally be very happy that we're seeing wetter than average conditions move back in here, and this is going to help with the firefight. Problem is, when you burn off that much vegetation, when you rain on top of it, we end up getting flash flooding events, and that flood water is full of ash and debris and stuff. And so it's good and it's bad. In Australia, my heart goes out to you with how incredibly rough of a year we've started off with here, but the rain will at least help with the firefight. In the United States, this is now looking out at the entire month of February. We've already looked at January. The models are really advertising this. Split flow, drier here, and we need to see what the next model run looks like. And the moment it comes out, I'm going to put it in the videos, okay? Because this pattern has been advertised for a while. I don't like it for the West Coast because I don't think we truly know where the ridge is going to sit. If it moves at all to the west, just flip the entire pattern over for the West Coast and just keep it wet. This is the most critical piece right through here, because there is a polar branch to the jet stream and there is a subtropical branch. We've seen it consistently wanting to paint this corridor wet. In terms of temperatures, well, with that same pattern, well, this region is going to favor much more normal winter-like weather at times. In fact, it might be slightly cooler than average. And only down here from Texas stretching up through the East Coast do I think we see some cooler weather. Warmer weather. There is multi-model support for this. The CFSV2 sees a similar pattern to this as well. But what I want to get to at the end here is this. Do you notice that for March, April, and May from the NMME and from the European model, they still have that same dry patch, splitting the flow like this? And that's important to ask ourselves if we see any validity in this pattern, because it's painting the Ohio River Valley and surrounding states wet, and also parts of the southeast. So I went back and I said, well, is there any sort of long-term trend for March, April, and May in the Ohio River Valley? And according to NOAA, yes, it has been getting wetter over the last 70 years in that area, to the tune of about 2 additional inches of rainfall. Going from there, I said, what does it take to get a really wet spring in the Ohio River Valley? Well, we need to get strong winds coming off in the Pacific jet stream off of Japan, and then we need a strong subtropical branch here with a trough out west. Now, we've been seeing that pattern, which means if we get again in March, April, and May what we've seen through January so far, it's going to go. It's going to be very, very wet. Also, remember I told you to see those warmer waters here extending over to here as well? We certainly see that those same wettest years, March through May, in the Ohio River Valley had that as well. Now, I'm not locking this pattern down. I'm not saying that this forecast is going to verify perfectly. I'm just saying that there is some meteorology that is consistent with the longer-term model outlook for this area. But we're a long ways away. Things can change, and they most likely will. I just want you to be watching the trend in the model with me, okay? With that, we'll wrap it up right here. Thanks. Have a great rest of your week. Talk to you again tomorrow.